Meta just hit a record high on Monday. Nvidia's 17% surge the past month has it knocking on the door of a $4 trillion market cap. My question is this: should you own both Meta and Nvidia in the face of their face-ripping rallies? Chad, I'll start with you here. If you had to pick one of these two names in the back half of the year, which one is it?
I would perhaps go with Meta. It seems as if they have a continual competitive advantage, and it doesn't look like they're going to be in the crosshairs of the DOJ anytime soon. With that said, I'm sorry, I'm going to pivot. You want to own other companies within the Mag 7 that perhaps their valuations have been drastically discounted.
Brooke, you mentioned earlier on this new super intelligence unit for Meta, and it sounds great. It's led by Alexander Wang, who led Scale AI. Sounds exciting on paper. What I can't figure out is how is this going to impact Meta's earnings this year? I don't know if it will.
Well, what Mark Zuckerberg says, that this is a necessity of the company. Of course, Mark Zuckerberg, the founder, the CEO of Meta, formerly known as Facebook. But what he really said here was that he believes that this is the beginning of a new era for humanity. And he's fully committed to doing what it takes for Meta to lead the way. Of course, Meta looking to get ahead in this AI revolution that so many companies are looking to jump on board. And as you mentioned, he's brought in top executives from Scale AI CEO Alexander Wang. He also brought in former GitHub CEO, as well as Nat Friedman there. He also brought in 11 new hires who are really focused around this AI trade. And he's really saying here, investors really need to jump on and understand that this is not a want, a desire. This is a necessity for the company to compete in the near term and really long term here, Brian.
Al, you know who's really driving the future of humanity? That's Jensen Huang and Nvidia. Make the case for Nvidia.
Yeah, Nvidia, baby, the godfather of AI here. And we've seen mega cap stocks, especially Nvidia, outperform. You were just talking about this share price move that we've seen up about 15%. We are nearing closer and closer to that 4 trillion market cap. And just a little context here, Brian, if Nvidia hits those levels, that would be valued 36% higher than the entire British stock market. That's the FTSE 100, and just 18% below the total value of Japan's Nikkei 225. So that just goes to show the sheer enthusiasm around this company, around this stock. Of course, earnings, that's huge for this company. If we see any deterioration on that front when it comes to demand, along with the hyperscalers, if they hint at any sort of demand headwinds, Blackwell, obviously a big focus for a lot of those investors. If we see that, we could have a pullback in the stock. But so far, earnings have been relatively steady, moving to the upside. And I think that is the big next test for Nvidia. But I'm bullish here, and I think that Nvidia is going to continue to see a lot of those gains.
Gil, I know some colleagues of yours on the street, big fans of AMD, and they say, you know what, Lisa Su and her team, they're gonna narrow that gap with Jensen Huang and his crew over at Nvidia. I am curious broadly, Gil, how do you see the competitive landscape evolving for Nvidia?
Yeah, so that's the other part of it, is that Nvidia has almost the entire market right now. The distant number two is actually Google TPUs. Broadcom, which Broadcom supplies, so in that sense, they're also in the mix. But AMD, Intel, all those are really minor players. Going forward, we expect the custom chips made by Broadcom, Marvell, and others to have a bigger share of the market, AMD to start growing from that very small base, but very importantly, tying to the conversation you started earlier, Huawei. The more restricted Nvidia is selling into China, the better glide path there is for Huawei to accelerate growth and take bigger and bigger pieces of the market. So again, Nvidia participating, just will the shrinking share, because they're starting with owning almost the entire market. There's only one way to go from there.
Trading at record highs, Nvidia's market cap is nearing $4 trillion, overtaking Microsoft. And Dan Ives, Wedbush Securities Managing Director and Global Head of Technology Research, predicts it won't stop there.
And I think investors are starting to recognize we haven't even seen the biggest growth driver yet of AI, not just on enterprise and the use cases, but on the consumer side and ultimately autonomous and robotics. And this is, in my view, it's not just 4 trillion. I mean, we're going to be looking at a $5 trillion market cap in NVIDIA.
And here with more on the catalysts continuing to push NVIDIA stock higher, we've got Yahoo Finance tech editor Dan Halley. Dan, what do we know?
Yeah, Brad, there's a number of things going on here. First, I want to shout out Dan Ives for that New York Mets pillow in the background. But there's a number of things going on around NVIDIA that are really helping to power the stock. And let's just start off with the big one, and that's the continued investment from hyperscalers in their data centers. So we've heard more about things like the Project Stargate from OpenAI, as well as Oracle. NVIDIA is a big part of that. Microsoft continues to purchase these GPUs. Google, Amazon, Meta, XAI, they're all gearing up and buying these and continuing to do so. And that's despite the fact that we were talking earlier in the year about the tariffs potentially having an impact on the build out. Maybe they will, maybe they won't change their path, but they seem to just be continuing to move forward and spending. One of the other things that's worth pointing out is sovereign AI. That's something that Project Stargate in Saudi Arabia is part of. When you look at how NVIDIA was received at GTC Paris, a lot of talk about sovereign AI and getting Europe's AI up to a caliber similar to what you can see around the US and China. So a lot of countries are leaning further into the idea of having their own sovereign AI, not necessarily relying on the AI capabilities of other countries. There's also the broader push towards powering inferencing. At first, when the big kind of generative AI boom kicked off with ChatGPT, it was all about training. And that's basically teaching these models what to do, what they'll predict next, how to write, based on millions of books, generate images, things along those lines. Now it's about inferencing. It's about taking those models and putting them to work. And so the original thinking was, well, the training uses a lot of power. You need heavy duty GPUs for that, not inferencing. The opposite's proven to be true, where you need those heavy duty GPUs to continue to power the inferencing because it provides a better answer and better response from those bots. And then the last thing is NVIDIA's continued belief in physical AI. Now, that means basically robots, and that includes self-driving cars. And so they have a large footprint there in the self-driving car space, but then also Jensen has been pushing this idea of actual robots working side by side with people in factories at first, and then down the line in the future, maybe having them in your home. That's not going to come for quite a while, but NVIDIA's well positioned here because A, they have a small computer that they can use that powers some of these robots. I've seen a number of them in person. The other is that they have the capability to train them up. So using a virtual world where they teach the robot how to kind of get around and then implement that in to the actual robot in the real world. So going from virtual to real and then sorting out the bugs from there. So there's a lot of positives around NVIDIA. Obviously, since it's such a big name stock, there will continue to be ups and downs. But this is why it seems to be on that upward trajectory generally.
And so that upward trajectory, a lot of the analysts that are covering the name believe that it could be the first company and be on the it's in the pole position essentially to get to $4 trillion. So we've even heard upside of $6 trillion from some of the most bullish calls out there on Wall Street. What do you think the broader kind of analyst consensus is really settling around right now, Dan?
I think it's really the fact that, look, NVIDIA is still the go-to for these kind of capabilities, right? They're the ones that build these GPUs, are the ones that offer the software that are being used most often. And yes, there are competitors. AMD is continuing to develop and kind of work to catch its stride alongside NVIDIA. We have NVIDIA's own customers, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, working on and deploying, already using their own AI chips. The thing is, while they may use their AI chips, their customers, their cloud customers, still want access to NVIDIA's GPUs. And so they have to offer NVIDIA GPUs to ensure that their customers are getting what they want and continue to return. So I think that's where a lot of that kind of exuberance around NVIDIA comes from, is they are still the chip leader, despite the fact that there are continuing threats and growing threats from not just their ordinary competitors, but the people that they actually sell directly to. And by the way, just quickly, NVIDIA's also doing the flip side of that. Cloud providers allow you to get access to NVIDIA's GPUs. NVIDIA's also working with companies to provide cloud access to its hardware as well. So it's kind of like, look, we're business partners, we're pals, but at the end of the day, we're working out for ourselves.
Yeah, all right. Well, we're going to be watching closely to see within these trade deals, especially US and China, where the IP potentially does continue to be something that NVIDIA has to think about. That has certainly been one of the hangups here, we do know. Dan, thanks so much for breaking this down.
Green all over the place, Christine. We just keep grinding higher here. What do you make of it?
Yeah, look, investor appetite is there, right? AI enthusiasm has returned. We just talked about Nvidia. I think there were some whispers today about, is this, signifying a bubble here? Is this .com 2.0 with Nvidia being at almost record highs here? And if you look at what analysts are saying, and I know we're going to hear from one, that covers Nvidia here soon, no one's saying that this is overvalued. I think many are actually saying that we're still undervalued here on Nvidia because we haven't quite priced in AI and the impact on productivity. We heard from CEO of Salesforce today, Mark Benioff, saying that 30 to 50% of their workload is now done by AI. And we've seen a slew of companies cut, positions because of AI, whether it be Salesforce or CrowdStrike, Klarna, or Duolingo, who's actually going to be more discreet about hiring because of AI. So I don't think we've folded in the full impact. The one concern I have, and maybe it's not so much a concern, but what I'm watching is competition from Chinese AI companies. There was a great report in Data Trek Research earlier in the week that just showed the valuations are so much more appetizing on some of those Chinese AI names versus the US ones, and the returns have actually been higher for those names. So that's one area that I'm watching is the competition between us and those Chinese AI names.
Josh, Julie mentioned it briefly, but I just want to double tap on it. The Mag 7 names, Josh, those giants, right? How have they been working?
Yeah, Josh. So I have a visual representation over here on our big board, right, of sort of some of what Julie was talking about. And what I'm looking at here is just performance since the April 8th low. Most of these stocks here are all in the top 20 of the S&P 500. They're all AI tied. So I looked at sort of an AI basket of stocks, right? You have Oracle, Broadcom, Dell, AMD, NRG, as Julie mentioned, Vistra, which is sort of an AI power play, and Palantir. What's interesting is all of the Mag 7 have underperformed them, right? So Nvidia's up about 60% at a new high. Really, the rest of these companies have come up about 25, 30% maybe from the bottom. Apple hasn't really gone anywhere. And Christine, I guess the question this sort of brings me to for you is just, is the next AI trade going to continue to be the broadening out of this trade into cloud computing, into energy, into some of the other chip names? Or is that sort of where it feels like this trade is headed as we go through kind of the second half of 25?
Yeah, I think we are already seeing that broadening out. There's a lot of liquidity in the market, and I think what surprised me the most is how quickly we've rebounded from that April low, and it just goes to show the appetite, the enthusiasm amongst all of tech. So not just within the AI space, but there is liquidity there. There was cash on the sidelines for quite a while, and now many of those investors bought the dip, and now we're seeing it rip.
Meta just hit a record high on Monday. Nvidia's 17% surge the past month has it knocking on the door of a $4 trillion market cap. My question is this: should you own both Meta and Nvidia in the face of their face-ripping rallies? Chad, I'll start with you here. If you had to pick one of these two names in the back half of the year, which one is it?
I would perhaps go with Meta. They seem as if they have a continual competitive advantage, and it doesn't look like they're going to be in the crosshairs of the DOJ anytime soon. With that said, I'm sorry, I'm going to pivot. You want to own other companies within the Mag 7 that perhaps their valuations have been drastically discounted.
Brooke, you mentioned earlier on this new super intelligence unit for Meta, and it sounds great. It's led by Alexander Wang, who led Scale AI. Sounds exciting on paper. What I can't figure out is how is this going to impact Meta's earnings this year? I don't know if it will.
Well, what Mark Zuckerberg says, that this is a necessity of the company. Of course, Mark Zuckerberg, the founder, the CEO of Meta, formerly known as Facebook. But what he really said here was that he believes that this is the beginning of a new era for humanity. He's fully committed to doing what it takes for Meta to lead the way. Of course, Meta looking to get ahead in this AI revolution that so many companies are looking to jump on board. And as you mentioned, he's brought in top executives from Scale AI CEO Alexander Wang. He also brought in former GitHub CEO, as well as Nat Friedman there. He also brought in 11 new hires who are really focused around this AI trade. And he's really saying here, investors really need to jump on and understand that this is not a want, a desire. This is a necessity for the company to compete in the near term and really long term here, Brian.
Al, you know who's really driving the future of Amati? That's Jensen Huang and Nvidia. Make the case for Nvidia.
Yeah, Nvidia, baby, the godfather of AI here. And we've seen mega cap stocks, especially Nvidia, outperform. You were just talking about this share price move that we've seen up about 15%. We are nearing closer and closer to that 4 trillion market cap. And just a little context here, Brian, if Nvidia hits those levels, that would be valued 36% higher than the entire British stock market. That's the FTSE 100, and just 18% below the total value of Japan's Nikkei 225. So that just goes to show the sheer enthusiasm around this company, around this stock. Of course, earnings, that's huge for this company. If we see any deterioration on that front when it comes to demand, along with the hyperscalers, if they hint at any sort of demand headwinds, Blackwell, obviously a big focus for a lot of those investors. If we see that, we could have a pullback in the stock. But so far, earnings have been relatively steady, moving to the upside. And I think that is the big next test for Nvidia. But I'm bullish here, and I think that Nvidia is going to continue to see a lot of those gains.
AI powerhouse Nvidia surging to an all-time high, pushing that company's market cap to about $3.77 trillion. Now cements the company as one of the most valuable companies in the world. That stock rose about 4% to 154.31. The record is only the latest milestone for the company. It has risen more than 60% off an April low. Recent earnings, strong sales were catalysts for bullish sentiment for the tech darling. With today's gains, Nvidia stands as the world's largest stock. It was interesting, Mark. We were talking earlier, the team at Loop Capital, they put out a note, maintain their buy. They took the target at 250. Per Bloomberg, that's a street high, and they told their clients Nvidia remains essentially a monopoly for critical tech, and it has pricing and margin power. I'm curious, though, when you look at the charts of Nvidia, what do the technicals tell you?
Well, it's new all-time highs. It's very difficult to sell a stock like that. I mean, it's up 28% in the last 3 months, and actually that's more than it's been up in the last year. So people recall that the stock peaked out last summer and went sideways for a period of time, and that's what a lot of these Mag 7 FANG stocks do, and then when they start to ascend again and break out to new highs, it generally pays to follow that move. And so, my technical target is right around 165 and then 180. 250 for me would be aggressive, but I do sense that it can continue likely up into the month of August. The fall might be a time when generally market, we see some consolidation, but I don't see it yet. I see that Nvidia is able to power the semiconductor sector. Now we have great results out of Micron, of course, what we discussed earlier, and AMD. They're all, surging in a way that really makes semis quite attractive here, and I still love technology, so it's right to stick with it.
All right, quite attractive. We'll leave it there. Thank you, Mark. That is the closing bell on Wall Street, and now it's market domination overtime, getting full team coverage of all the moves to get you up to speed on the action from today's trade. Yahoo Finance's Josh Schaefer is here with me, as well as Mark Newton, Fundstrat Global Advisors Managing Director and Global Head of Technical Strategy. So markets, looking at the popular average here, looks like we're then mixed. The Dow's going to finish down about 90 points. The S&P 500 looking unchanged, flat at 60.92. I have the NASDAQ up about 0.3%. Joshua, over to you for more on where the market's closed.
Yeah, Josh, so as you mentioned, not a ton of action in your major averages, and there really wasn't even a ton of movement when you look at just this intraday of the S&P 500. I think at the peak of the day, we were maybe up 0.2%, so really markets didn't even move that much at the index level either. A couple of other things I want to hit on, Josh, that we had sort of been following over the last couple days. So the 10-year T-note we had been talking about, right? Of course, that had been on a recent decline, did not move much today. Then I'm going to flip over to Bitcoin. Let's take a look at how Bitcoin did on the day. Bitcoin up slightly, over 107,000 a coin right now. And then also looking over at oil. Oil ticked up a little bit today. We had been following a pretty big decrease in oil over the last 2 days, right? If I flip this to a 3-day, that had sort of been the story of the market to start the week, was oil lower, stocks up. But the big news, I think, in a world where we didn't have too much move today, Nvidia. We had Nvidia hit a record close today for the first time since I believe it was January, so one of the first record closes for Nvidia of the year. And if you just flip out over the last month or the last 3 months, stock's been on a pretty good run off the bottom, right? So this was sort of your April low. off the tariff news, Nvidia fell with the rest of the market. Stock has been looking pretty good and now hitting a new all-time high. I will also call out just broadly the semis have been doing pretty well. So if you look at the chip sector and then take a look at a 3-day here, we had a decent rally in semis yesterday. You can see Broadcom was up 6% over the last 3 days. AMD up 12% over the last 3 days. So decent action there. And then I'll just close out here with the sectors on the day and get your outperformers. Outperformer on the day was once again tech, had healthcare a little bit, slight outperformance, I guess we could call it, but really another tech-driven day in markets.
All right, thank you, Joshua. Mark, I also want to get your take here. Give me the technical take, Mark, on today's action. What do you see?
Well, the biggest development, I think, was Nvidia hitting new all-time highs. I mean, it's 7% of the S&P, and certainly a big move. A lot of people thought it might stall out near that 153 level, and to get above that, in my view, is going to be positive in the days to come for both S&P and QQQ. So it's really about the move this week, less than today. We saw a really good movement this week out of the financials, and the week being only Wednesday. So it's really been Monday, Tuesday. Remarkable outperformance in the last couple of days out of industrials, financials, transportation, and consumer discretionary, all sectors that had lagged. Into Monday of this week, over the last month, 8 out of 11 sectors were down over the last month. Some to the extent almost 2 to 3% when you look at financials, industrials. That has all changed, folks, this week. So a very, very good recovery, very good signs out of that, a broadening out in this rally. Many people get skeptical as indices hit new all-time highs, but honestly, that's the time you really got to pay attention. Sentiment remains offsides, and that's a key message. Until we see all these CTAs and hedge funds really start to pour money back into the market, trends look great. The economy's good, earnings are good.
Dan, great to have you on the program with us. We saw strong third quarter results from Micron, boosted by AI demand. So how does this factor into the broader AI trade and add just another thought in the frame of mind for some of the Nvidia investors out there as well?
I mean, there's one chip fueling the AI revolution, and that's Nvidia. And I think investors are starting to recognize we haven't even seen the biggest growth driver yet of AI, not just on enterprise and the use cases, but on the consumer side and ultimately autonomous and robotics. And in my view, it's not just 4 trillion. I mean, we're going to be looking at a $5 trillion market cap in Nvidia.
And so at what point, what's the kind of modeling and the time frame that you're kind of anticipating that could come to fruition?
Street's still underestimating growth longer term, I think by 15 to 20%. That could be conservative. I think when you actually see the dynamics playing out today, remember, they took China basically out of their forecast. And if you have any trade deal, a big chip on the table is Nvidia, and I believe they're not going to hand that business on a silver platter to Huawei. So I think right now investors are starting to recognize the growth opportunities for Nvidia, and we've talked about it, demand to supply 10 to 1.
And so as we're thinking about that, and you mentioned China, one of the major factors within any type of trade deal is going to be IP, that intellectual property. What is the likelihood that we see an outcome on the intellectual property front that is favorable for Nvidia, and what does that do in terms of unlocking some of that addressable market?
I think probably less for Nvidia from an IP perspective. I think the bigger issue from an IP, especially a lot of the software players, that's been the big issue when it comes to China. But look, there's a give and take here. And the reality is that Jensen wants that business back. He's talked about it. And, when you think about it, $8 billion a quarter, but eventually that could be 10, 12 billion a quarter. But China, they know that there's only one chip in the world fueling AI revolution. That's the godfather of AI, Jensen, Nvidia.
We've heard some really strong calls for even $6 trillion market caps for Nvidia here. What is, you think, the critical kind of checklist in order for us to get to that point?
I think checklist is, and just take all the geopolitical out for a second, but I think first it's the use cases that are now exploding. And we're seeing that in the hyperscale and Microsoft, of course, names like Palantir, which continues to be one of our top names. Then it's the consumer piece, everything Zuckerberg and Meta's doing, what we're seeing with Alphabet and others, because that's a whole nother leg to the stool in terms of the consumer side. And then the holy grail, autonomous, robotics, humanoids, that's not even being factored in here today.
And so you mentioned a few of the other themes that I wanted to get to as well here. You, of course, are tracking Palantir and another name that's seen new record highs. What do you think is really contributing to the mindset around the trading and the thesis for Palantir right now?
Look, I mean, they hate it at 20, despise it at 70, call it expensive at 100, right? I mean, now the bear is 145 because, as we always say, they can't find AI in the spreadsheets when they're in hibernation mode. Palantir, we view as $1 trillion market cap next 2 to 3 years. There's no company from a software perspective that has what they have. And I think now, as they go further and further after the enterprise, as sovereigns go down the AI path, this is just the beginning of what's going to be a golden age of Palantir. And I think, look, is it expensive today? Of course. But if you look out 2, 3, 4 years, I mean, we're going to be talking about one of the most transformational companies in the world.
All right, for today's Power Player, I am locked in on Hewlett-Packard Enterprises. The company is holding its annual Discover event in Vegas to show off its latest technologies to customers, especially on the AI front. HPE CEO Antonio Neri is here with me now from the event. Antonio, always great to see you. Don't know how you made time for me, but I appreciate it nonetheless. Out of all the announcements that you have come out with here from Discover, the announcement with Nvidia and AI factories really caught my attention. Why is that such a big thing for HPE's bottom line?
Well, good morning, Brian, and thanks again for having me. What a great week for us here at HPE Discover in Vegas. I'm standing here on the show floor. It's 7 acres of technology on display. And after a great day yesterday at the Sphere where I gave my keynote. But to your point, yesterday we made a number of very strategic announcements. One of them obviously was the expansion of our AI factories with Nvidia. We continue to have a terrific partnership with Nvidia, expanding our solutions for sovereigns, which is an area where we see tremendous interest and growth. Obviously, the continued CapEx investment in service providers, as well as the continuation of the model builders, and then enterprise. And enterprise here, we have more than 12,000 customers visiting us this week, and they are all interested to accelerate that journey to AI. And that tells you the interest is super, super high. And that's with NVIDIA, we have co-architected and co-engineered a solution that's easy to deploy for time to value.
Antonio, KeyBank out with a good report here today. They surveyed a lot of CIOs who are out there buying tech. They are noting the slowest IT spending growth outlook since 2020. How is that starting to take shape in your business?
Well, look, we don't see a slowdown in the IT spend. In fact, if you really follow the last few quarters of continuous revenue growth, you see that the momentum is across all line of businesses. Look, to deploy AI, continue your journey to a hybrid cloud experience across your enterprise, you need more networking. And so networking has clearly recovered in the market, and we see that in our growth, in our orders, and now in our revenue. GreenLake has been positioned extremely successful to be that bridge to provide a hybrid experience, and we continue to grow on an average of 35 to 45%. And this week we announced the agentic approach to our GreenLake cloud. And what they're very interested is using GreenLake as an intelligence, meaning we can bring to them an army of AI agentic capabilities so they can remove people that are in the loop and put them on the loop. And so those actions can be taken by AI. So I haven't seen that, honestly, Brian. But obviously, there is a lot of uncertainty in the market. There is always geopolitical tension, but IT will continue to be a top of mind for enterprises.
Antonio, before we let you go, I know you're a busy guy at this conference. July 9th is the Juniper trial. Would you assign any probability to this, I guess this trial not actually happening, that the government drops its case and lets you take battle versus Cisco in this market?
Well, look, everything is possible. We continue to work to try to work a remediation sort of settlement. But fact of the matter is that we are so close to the trial. Our view is that we believe this is pro-competitive. We believe this is good for enterprises. Remember, we don't support consumers. And ultimately, we believe we will prevail in court if we have to go all the way there.
All right, we'll leave it there. Antonio Neri, good to see you as always. Good to see that HPE stock symbol behind you at the conference. I'm digging it. Put something on black for me in Vegas. We'll talk to you soon, Antonio.
Will do. Thank you.
Right.